guest speaker and introduce ourselves and what our goal is. Start soon.
Roger Sprague, City Council.
Steve Griffiths, Planning Commission.
Chester Norika, City Council.
Gary Pettyman, Planning Commission.
Susan Blocky, City Council.
I'm Chandler, City Manager.
Dick Anderson, City Council.
Riley Hoagland, Planning Commission. Wes Ryan, City Council.
Deanna Henderson, Planning Commission.
Kip Ford, City Council.
Nathan Long, Planning Commission.
Don Williams, Mayor.
Bruce Robinson, Planning Commission. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to City Manager.
Thank you, and thanks so much for allowing us to hold this meeting. I'm pleased to discuss tonight some of the stuff that the staff and I have been working on, all about VRDs. It seems our lives revolve around VRDs.
I'm going to say an embarrassing picture. You're probably not going to want to be there because you've got these too big of letters right in the middle of your face.
Thanks, Mayor.
You're welcome.
All right, I'll stand a little bit over here so that I'm out of the picture. Okay. Actually, someday I'm going to figure out how to stand back. There you go. I think I can do that now. If you guys don't mind shifting this way. Our techie showed me how to change it from with using one of these hickeys. So anyways, so the staff and I have been working since our last work meeting with the City Council to try to put into place some recommendations, some possible ideas and solutions based upon their discussions. When I was coming in, one of the comments that I heard today was that let's finish this, let's get this done. Hopefully, we are at the beginning of the end. Okay? There's some important things, especially the public input process, that still needs to happen, which is critical any time that you're developing an ordinance. But hopefully we are at the beginning point where we're seeing some things come to a conclusion. In the not too distant future, we can bring VRDs to an end for a time being and let them rest and then go forward with our business. I wanted to spend a few minutes recapping a little bit as to where we left off with the City Council. Let me also just recap with the documents that you have in front of you. You each have a copy of the slides that I'm going to be using. You also have copies of the ordinances as they are being proposed tonight. The strikeout in the red are changes in the language to the ordinance. Okay? So, quick recap. City Council discussed time limitation, and we know that generally is accessory use. We discussed a little bit more in a broader sense on should there be areas where there is no restriction to the time limitation, the number of nights you can rent, and should there be areas where there shouldn't be. And what we left that work meeting with was that west of 101, and if you draw a line straight north of that, west of that line, so that would include Roads End, would be areas where you would not have time limitations where they could rent for 365 days a year. East of 101 are areas that would be restricted, much more so than we have today on the number of nights a VRD can be rented. We then discussed occupancy and ownership limitation. Occupancy right now is based on two formulas. For those prior to 2010, it is based on the state building requirements. After 2010, there is a max of 16 per VRD that's allowed in a VRD that's being rented. We talked about limiting that, and we'll discuss that a little bit more in detail. There's also some ownership limitations that we have in the city. Currently in all zones but two, VRDs are limited so that a person can have interest in only one VRD. In the recreational commercial and the general commercial, you can have ownership of more than one VRD. We talked about nuisance enforcement. These are things such as trash, noise, congestion, things of that nature. We talked about parking. One of the things that we discussed is that the city has a parking problem. of which VRDs are one contributor to that problem. So how do we deal with this, both with the VRDs and on a more global scale of the city in its entirety? Incidentally enough, in the long term, this may be the biggest challenge of all in dealing with parking, both in neighborhoods where there's lots of VRDs, neighborhoods where there's not. It's a challenge that we'll be facing as we try to go forward. Since our meeting, there has been discussion that's been brought to me about some of the health and safety regulations, specifically the Oregon Travelers Accommodation Rules. These are rules that apply to hotels. And you have a copy of their rules in there, and the question was brought up, should they also be applied to VRDs? So we'll have a little bit of discussion on that. And then finally, we discussed public education program and what the city can do to help initiate better VRD owners, better local representatives, so forth. So, any questions on the recapping of where the city council was in their last work meeting?
Could you give me the terms, the unit of measure for time limitation?
As it is now?
Yes.
As
you're recapping your discussion.
time limitation as it is now is that for a VRD, the VRD has to be incidental and subordinate to the main use of the property.
I was asking what's the time limit? Is it nights for the building?
Nights for the building. Yes, we'll get into that a little bit.
Night that the building is occupied at all by a renter.
Yes, yeah. Any other questions?
We discussed the limitation on the east side excluding lakefront.
We did, and we'll be getting into that in just a few minutes. Okay. The goal of the meeting tonight are to present possible changes to the city ordinances. One of the things that I have preached my whole career as a staff member is not to have ownership of ideas. You run into trouble when you start doing that. So what you're going to see tonight are possible changes to the ordinances that would implement, or hopefully implement, what the city council discussed. Okay? And then the second part is to initiate the formal ordinance preparation and the public input process. Now, so far, all of your discussions, or the city council's discussions, has really been with staff. You've had a lot of communication from the public through emails, phone calls, so forth, but we have not had the official, formal public input process. That process is critical, and it's important. And one thing I would recommend to all of you, that as you leave this meeting today, that you don't render a judgment, okay? You certainly will have ideas on what you like and what you don't like, but this is the time when it's really important to listen to the input that's coming in. We have had a lot of discussion on statistics and anecdotal evidence, okay? I want to tell you that zoning is all anecdotal, okay? Because when people are considering zoning changes, they're considering how it affects them personally. That, by definition, is anecdotal. So you will get a lot of that, and that's all important, as is the statistical information that you get as well. So on Monday, we will have before the City Council a motion to formally initiate the ordinance preparation process. That, in turn, also initiates the public input process. Okay?
What does that involve?
It involves the preparation of the ordinances. It involves public hearings. I've already asked you if I can take this on the road and discuss it in a couple of extra meetings. It also involves creating the record and the findings of facts that will support whatever ordinance comes out of this. Okay. Any other questions? Okay.
So
Go ahead.
this document is going to be a fluid document. That's what you're saying.
Ultimately, my goal is to present to you one ordinance that shows all of the changes in that you will ultimately decide upon. Yes, but they will affect different parts of the city code, and you'll see that tonight. Much of what we will be talking tonight about is specifically the changes to the zoning ordinance. But there are also other provisions that would change other parts of the ordinance. We will get into them a little bit, but not as much in detail. Those ones actually don't need recommendations of the Planning Commission because they're not part of the zoning ordinance. They're not land use. But we're bringing them up here so that you can see the package as a whole. All right, some of the guiding principles that we followed as we were preparing this presentation. As you know, I held several meetings earlier or last year, and perhaps the overarching theme that I heard was keep it simple. Okay, and so that's what we try to do: easy to read, easy to understand, easy to follow, easy to enforce. Okay, so we tried to accomplish that. We also looked at recognizing the changes that have occurred in the city, especially over the last 10 to 15 years. Another guiding principle we have is to protect the neighborhoods. These have been commercial uses that are in residential neighborhoods and will certainly have an effect on the neighborhoods. The fourth is to implement the will of the City Council. And then finally, the last one is to comply with Oregon laws. Oregon has some very unique land use laws, and some things that I would love to be able to do, the laws get in the way, and I can't do them. And so part of what we're trying to do, and this is where Richard Townsend have been a big help to me, is making sure that I don't run afoul of the laws. Okay.
Before you move on, to implement the will of the council, can I get a sense from the council, is this like a unanimous opinion that these ordinances reflect the will of the council?
I haven't seen them yet.
Oh, you haven't seen them?
No, this is the presentation.
When you guys were having your discussions, did you feel that you had come close to a consensus of opinion in order to guide the development of these ordinances?
I don't believe so.
I didn't think so either. I felt like we've made progress.
Yeah.
Progress, yes, but
No, nothing wrong enough.
no.
No, but we shouldn't be making up our minds until we get
Mr. Chair. And one thing, Ron, and I don't really need a discussion tonight, but there's nothing in here about the economics and the impact that the VRDs have. We do rely heavily on that money for a lot of our services. And I just would like that to be included in this discussion somewhere.
That's actually part of recognizing the changes that occurred in Lincoln City. I'll just jump ahead a little bit. The VRD industry is an important industry to the city. We have just under 500 VRDs in the city.
How many of those are in residential zones?
Almost all. And we'll get into that in just a minute. Almost all of them are in residential zones. We're going to be talking about the locations of those in just a few minutes. And they all, of course, contribute to the transient room tax, which is a major resource to the city, not just for our Visitors and Convention Bureau, but also for our roads, our police services, and a variety of other fun projects that we have. So the mayor's right. It is a critical part of our funding source for the city. Yes.
What about the role of the comprehensive plan in this process?
We'll be coming to that at the very end of it as we start talking about, as we go into this process, the studies that need to be done before we're finished. So we'll be discussing that in just a few minutes. Okay. All right. Just a little bit of demographics. The map that you see on the left are the zones of the city. At the last count that I took, there were 497 VRDs. 178 of those, or 36%, are located in Rhodes End, up in this section. Okay. 178, or 36%, are located in the R15 zone, and that's the area that's mostly on the west side of the highway. So it's the orange that you're seeing here. Okay. The VR zone, which we just approved 2 rezonings of VR to a VR zone, which is in this area. Let's see if I get I believe it's in this area right here. There are 37 or 7%. The commercial or mixed-use zones have 66 or 14%, and then other residential zones, which would include things like your residential recreation, your R110, your R17.5 has 30, and your RM has 38 or 14%. Okay.
Our maps don't match that at all.
Maps.
With the ones that
Oh, no, I am on slide number 4. This would be page number 4.
right after demographics.
It says demographics. I think I left a map off of that. It's a blank one. Sorry about that.
These pages are colorful, so
Okay.
we can't identify them.
It is identified as demographics, VRDs by itself. I think I printed that before I put the map. Great help for me from one of our employees, Sandy, was in putting together these maps. I would go in and talk to her, and she'd produce a map, and I'd say, "Oh, this is perfect." And then I'd come back 10 minutes later and say, "Yeah, can you just change this a little bit?" And she'd change it and say, "This is perfect." And then I'd say, "Oh, can you just change it a little bit more?" So she was a big help in putting the two together. Okay. Now, based upon the City Council's discussions, so there are, in looking at where to allow VRDs with time limitation, without time limitation, where they're not permitted, they looked basically and said, again, west of the Highway 101 is an area where they would consider allowing VRDs without time limitation. Okay? East of Highway 101 would be where there would be significant time limitations on it. And then if you look at the map and you just draw the line straight up, that would include Roads End. But we're going to talk about Roads End separately in just a few minutes. So we're going to hang on to that one and talk about it as the last of these maps. So what you see on this map is the light green. Okay, that's areas that currently permit VRDs without time limitation and without ownership limitation. In other words, I keep hitting these buttons. In other words, 365 days a year you can rent it, and you can own more than one VRD. Those currently allow that. They would include things like your commercial zone, your general commercial zone, your recreational commercial zone, your VR zone, and a few smaller zones that we have. The darker green, this area right here, okay, right here, those are areas that you'll see in the proposal we're making tonight, would allow VRDs without time limitation, but with ownership limitation. So you could rent those for 365 days, but you could only own or have ownership interest in one VRD. Okay? That's primarily the R15 zone. And as I mentioned, there are 178 VRDs within that zone. Okay? The third area would permit VRDs with a time limitation to them and with an ownership limitation. Now that's really 4 zones that you're looking at. The biggest one is the R175, which is the orange area, and you'll notice that some of that also is across on the west side of the 101, a few areas, smaller areas. And it also includes the R110, the RR, which is the residential recreation, and the RM, which is multifamily residential. And then the dark areas, the dark brown, are areas where we already don't permit VRDs. Those would be your open space, parks, some industrial, and so forth.
Ron?
Yes.
Didn't we identify 12 VRDs that were east of Highway 101 that we wouldn't apply?
We did.
limitations on?
We did.
Okay.
Okay, so we're going to talk about each of these areas and a little bit more on how they would work. I got to go grab some papers real quick. Okay, the first area was the light green. It is the general commercial, recreational commercial, VR zone. These are areas that currently allow VRDs without time limitation and without ownership limitation. As I mentioned, these currently, that is how it is currently, and there are no ordinance changes proposed on these. So they would continue to operate as they have.
I'm sorry, just for clarification's sake, this still is a planning commission meeting, or are we going to waive the asking for permission to speak?
Yes.
Okay. Just want to check, please. Ron, can you just give me I cannot read a single letter on these things, so can you just, where the big block is, give me, what is that street there? On the left.
Right here?
Yeah, give me the
This
southern
is
end
101 here.
Yeah.
Following it down,
Right.
you're into Cutler City down here, Taft, D Lake is this area.
I got that.
Um,
But I guess I put the north on the south side.
Casino areas.
Okay, yes.
It's right here.
Yeah, the block right at the bottom of it. What?
Right here.
No, up the big block. There you go.
right here.
Yeah, what is the street, the south end of that?
That's Lincoln Shores.
Lincoln
Yeah.
Shores. Thank you. I just can't see a thing here.
It's my understanding that Lincoln Shores has CCNRs that are different than.
I did not look at CCNRs at all. This works independently of CCNRs. The CCNRs can be more restrictive than the city. They cannot be less restrictive than the city. Yes.
One correction, I think Phase 3 Olivia Beach is not represented on the map.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. So as I mentioned, these already allow this, so there would be no changes that we are proposing at this time to the ordinances. The next map does have some changes. These are the R15 zone, okay, the areas where there's an R15 designation. As I mentioned, 178 or 36% of the VRDs are located within this zone. So the proposal that's before you tonight is to change it so that you would allow VRDs without time limitation, but with ownership limitation. You could rent it 365 days, but you can have only ownership interest in one VRD. Okay? Now, this is where some of the Oregon law comes into place. Our ordinances are really based right now that if it's a commercial zone, it's unlimited. If it's a residential zone, it is limited, okay, by the accessory use definition. In order to make this type of a change and looking towards how to defend it, how to make it work under the Oregon law, it is to change it so that it's not entirely residential. So what we're proposing is that this zone would be changed to an R15 mixed-use zone. Now, in mixed-use zones, you can have a combination of some residential, some commercial. In this case, the commercial is limited to just VRDs. Okay, it doesn't add anything else into it. Everything else in the R15 language stays exactly the same, except we add a provision that would allow VRDs as a permitted use. It also, as I mentioned, it keeps the ownership limitation. And then the VRDs are also subject to the licensing regulations that are both contained in the zoning ordinance and in a Title V of the city code.
Are you suggesting that people who now own multiple VRDs in that zone then would be grandfathered, or how would you handle it?
There are some grandfathering clauses that we have put into this, yes. Okay.
Question though. If you just got rid of the accessory use definition in the VRD ordinance, wouldn't that eliminate most of that problem?
Yes. However, you can't just get rid of the accessory use, and we will talk about that when we get to the properties that are on the east side of 101.
Why couldn't you just get rid of it? Period. For both sides. It doesn't make any difference. Wouldn't that just eliminate a lot of the problem?
Well, okay, let me jump back. Depends on what you finally want. Oops, I'm going the wrong way. If you go back to this map, okay, if you eliminate accessory use all across the city, then you don't need this map. And everywhere in the city can have VRDs for unlimited nights. If that's your desire, then yes, you just simply eliminate the accessory use provision, and in every zone, you would allow unlimited rental. From our work meeting that we held at the end of November, the discussion that we had was to have it on the west side of 101 that would have that removed, but on the east side of it, we would still have it, but even more restricted, so that it would not permit unlimited rental everywhere in the city.
The reason I brought that up is because in looking through the ordinances for the other communities that I looked at, which were sent to us, nowhere in those do I find the term accessory use. I find conditional use, but I do not find accessory use. And that seems to be one of the biggest stumbling blocks that we have, and I'm just kind of curious why we seem to be the only ones holding on to that.
But they do have limitations to them. Okay, there are limitations.
Right.
If we were starting this city from scratch, okay, and we're creating our first zoning ordinance, the question that would be before you is, are there areas where you want VRDs allowed, and are there areas where you don't want VRDs allowed? Okay, that's a very traditional zoning approach. What we're describing is a very traditional zoning approach. If you feel that there are areas where you should not have unlimited rental of VRDs, then you have to still apply something like accessory use to that. Okay, we'll explain that a little bit more. Yes, Commissioner.
Except one that we didn't receive, and thanks to Kip for sending it out to us, and Kip, that was Manzanita, and they actually allow use limited, with some restrictions and guidelines, and within 3 zones, if I read that right, they don't use accessory. Use limitations.
When you look at zoning, okay, the way we do VRDs is really quite an anomaly for traditional zoning. People have a right, and this is established case law from the Supreme Court for many decades. People have a right to do something with their property, but they don't have a right to do everything with their property. That's zoning. That's the heart of zoning. If I had a right to do everything with my property, I'd put a commercial business anywhere I want in the city. Okay, it's been established through the court cases that people have a right to do something. We can't take away somebody's ability to do something with their property, but you can regulate so they can't do everything with their property. We're trying to apply that traditional zoning approach to the presentation tonight, where you're looking again, are there areas, and based on our meeting in November, are there areas such as west of 101 where you're okay with VRDs having unlimited rental? And are there areas where you don't want VRDs, and since we can't go that far, to have them more narrowed in how many nights they can rent? Okay.
Ron?
Yes, sir.
I think Susan mentioned something about the east side of lakefront would be unlimited.
We're going to come to that in just a few minutes.
But also keep in mind, I think the best thing that we should do is keep it simple. When we start blocking things with ordinances, our zones, different zones, we're just fighting ourselves with the.
One of the things that you'll see as I go through these several maps is that we have not created any new boundaries. We're using the boundaries that exist in our zoning ordinance map today. Okay? All right. Okay. So here are some of the possible language that you have for these changes. This would be found, this language is found under, if you look at the bottom of these other documents that you have, these ones, the title is listed at the bottom. Okay? So what we're looking at right now is the R15 mixed use zone proposal document, January 19, 2015. First page looks like this. So, in order to facilitate this zone, allowing unlimited rental, but keeping the limitation on the ownership, we are proposing that we create or shift the R15 zone to an R15 mixed-use zone. Part of that language to do that would state in the purposes, the R15 mixed-use zone authorizes vacation rental dwellings as the primary use. Unlike residential zones, this zone permits VRD use and operation without the accessory use limitation. That is, the use is authorized on its own and need not be incidental and subordinate to the principal use of the residence as the owner's vacation home. And then under the permitted use section, we would add the language, vacation rental dwellings in the R15 mixed-use zone as a primary use of a single-family dwelling as a vacation rental dwelling subject to the City Code 17.80.050 and licensing requirements of Chapter 5.4.
And this is the west side of 101.
This would be the areas that are in green.
Now, that's basically our residential zones.
They are residential zones.
The R175 are the other residential.
They are the other.
Is there any other residential outside of those two?
R1 7.9, R110, RR, and RS. Okay.
So this basically says we're going to drop accessory use for the R15 zone.
It does.
Of course, there is R15 if they're up on Voyage, one right up there.
We're not talking about roads in yet.
We're not talking, that's not roads out.
You're talking about the village of Cascade Head.
Yeah, there are existing homes up there now.
And so any questions on that? Okay. As I mentioned, there are currently 178 VRDs that are in the green area. All right. Okay. The next question that left us with is the VR zone. Is the VR zone necessary? We've had some areas that have been rezoned as VR. This is where it's important to understand the uniqueness of Lincoln City in its planning process. Most cities, all cities that I work in, but most cities have two separate maps that guide land use. They have their comprehensive plan map, they have their zoning map, and they are different. They look different from each other. The comprehensive map is prescriptive. It is what you want the city to become. The zoning map is descriptive. It's what it is. So, for example, if I want an area to become a commercial area on the map, the comprehensive plan map, it would show as commercial, even though it's all residential right now. And then as the Planning Commission and City Council look, when an application comes in, they would look and say, does it meet the comprehensive plan? And then they make their decision accordingly. In our city, what makes it so unique is that our zoning ordinance map and our comprehensive plan map are the same. So that the only thing that there is to guide the planning commission, the city council's description or decision-making is what is the criteria for changing a zone. So in other words, if we're looking at, let me go back. If we're looking at this map and we're saying, yes, we like this, okay, one of the loopholes that we have in our current setup with the VR zone is that I could go in and I could apply to make this area, I'll use the city's property, a VR zone, okay? And there's no prescriptive map to say, we don't want that to be a VR zone. They just have to meet the criteria of the VR. If you are really looking at trying to divide your city so that there are areas where you have unlimited rental and areas where you don't, then the VR zone needs to go away. Okay? Now, it can't just simply go away because we have properties that are zoned that. So one of the things we discussed, well, can we just simply rezone them to an R15 zone? Well, the problem with that is the VR zone also allows unlimited ownership, whereas the new R15 mixed zone would only allow limited ownership. So in order to deal with that, we are proposing that the language in the VR zone be changed, and this is found in the document called Vacation Rental Zone Document. It will be in red. The adoption of ordinance, whatever ordinance this is adopted, it is adopted, recognize the changing nature of the VRD market from secondary homes to business investments, the changes to the city's housing mix, and the city's desire to limit the influx of VRDs in some areas of the city. Therefore, effective such and such date, no new property shall be rezoned to the VR zone. Okay? Vacation rental zones prior to such and such a date may continue to operate under this chapter. Okay? So essentially that stops the VR zone from growing into other areas, whereas while the existing areas would be able to stay. Okay. 2 questions on that?
Nothing's going down, VR zone.
Yeah.
Do we have a lot of this?
You have 37 that are in VR zones, and Richard, how many acres now are covered by that?
12.
12 acres?
Have they even been built yet?
Phase 1 and 2 have been built.
Or have they been?
Between 15 and 28. By eliminating the VR zone anywhere else in the city, that almost makes that spot zoning in those 2 spots.
Only in the sense, well, it would if they were new, but the fact that they already exist is not a spot zone.
Well, it essentially changes them to the spot zone. That's what I'm getting at.
Yeah, I guess you could look at it that way, but they weren't spot zoning at the time when they were adopted.
That's true.
Councilor?
This map does not reflect VR zones, does it?
No. No, it just reflects the R15 zone.
What if the VR zone, I'm just thinking out loud, what if it went away and then the VRDs that are there, that they just continue as VRDs, but what if the zone went away? I mean, let's just say, as people sell their property over the years and it just is diminished, but it's not held as a spot on the map. Because, I'm with Roger on this one. It looks like the first thing that I saw visually with this is that's a spot on the map.
Well, the other way to do that, to protect the interests of the people that already have that, and again, the key difference is they can have multiple ownership.
They can have.
The other way to do that is to grandfather them in somehow.
Right, that's what I'm suggesting.
Is there evidence, do we know that there are multiple owners in that zone already?
No.
If they're not, then it's
Except what you're dealing with is it's not simply that they have it. It's a right that they now have as part of the zoning. You're down, yes, exactly, you're down zoning. Any other questions on
Well,
that?
and even if you sold it to somebody, it would be down zoning it to the person who sold it to.
Again, if our comprehensive plan map and our zoning map were different documents and the comprehensive plan map was truly prescriptive, this would not be an issue because you would look to that map and you'd say, this is where we're going to allow them and this is where we're not. But we don't have that advantage. Okay. Okay. All right. Okay, the next area that we want to talk about is the areas where VRDs would be limited on their time limitation and their ownership limitation. Now, if I was the great guru and could wave my wand and make things happen exactly as I wanted, all of these areas would be VRD-free areas. In the R175 and RR zone, there are 12 VRDs. In the RM zone, there are 21. Okay, and then there's a couple more there's one in the R110 zone, and so there's very few. Now, what's interesting is that one of the things that we were looking at is, in all of our discussions that we've been having over the last couple of months, is what has the market already done? Well, the market has already shown that these are not places where people are dying to get VRDs. Okay? So it creates an opportunity for us now that if we want areas where VRDs are very limited, we can do so now without the problem of having so many VRDs that have already established themselves based on what we have or have not done in the past.
When you put a time limitation on there, how do you propose to do that without naming the number of days?
That's what we are going to propose, is to name the number of days. Okay? Now, one of the things that was discussed was the idea of allowing unlimited around the lake. Okay? As I looked at that and went, how do we go about doing that? The only way I could find to do that was to either create a new zone or to create an overlay zone. Now, we went through that process earlier, and it was a very difficult process. And there are very few properties that along the lake that actually are VRDs right now. So again, I looked at the idea of the market and what is the market already determined, and so far the market has not said that this is a high priority for VRDs. So for the time being, I've left that off there. If you guys desire to go forward with that, then just know we will end up having to create a new zone or an overlay zone that would take the place of the zone there. Councilman?
Well, I think when we watched Ed from the DCB's presentation, found out that like 80% of the people don't even know that the lake exists. So.
When I lived on the lake, my property was zoned RC, recreational commercial. That would allow outright use.
It does already, yes.
And multiple ownerships. I would recommend that we zone the lakefront, not any house behind, just those that touch the shore. Zone those RC, and then that solves the problem.
Okay.
One thing we've got to think about is the lake is actually starting to get a little more popular. We're having a few more races and activities that happen on it. Maybe that's something in the future that should be promoted with Lincoln City is lake use. And if we do that, we need to think about numbers of subordinate incidental use, because that could be critical for that part. I mean, if we do ban multifamily RC, that would solve a lot of that. But if we don't, and we put a number to it, we got to make sure that number doesn't go too low.
Now, there's always a possibility that people can request to have their property rezoned, do something like an RC. Okay? The city doesn't have to initiate zoning. It can be left up to people to initiate that that in and of themselves.
We get back to spot zoning by doing that.
That would require a group of people, yes, to
And
create a bigger.
with RC, that you can have single-family dwellings, you can have multiple uses. So
You can have commercial
it
uses.
makes more sense to do that.
A good percentage of the lake isn't sewered, and the county won't license any traveler's accommodation certification.
That sounds like a motivation to.
Yeah, we can require that.
And we already do require, you can't have a VRD unless it's connected to the sewer. Okay. All right. So, okay, yes.
Before you leave that, how many in the R175, Ron? VRDs?
In the R175, R110, and RR, let's see, in the R175, there's 10.
Right.
In the R110, there's 1.
Right.
In the RR, there's 1. And in the RM, there's 21.
Thank you.
How many?
And we have, and we'll get to in just a minute, we have built in a grandfathering clause into the proposal tonight. Okay, now the way to make this happen, again, we look, the question that I asked is, can you just make accessory use go away and not allow it as a permitted use or an accessory use at all? And the problem, there were two things that we ran into. First was a question, do you want to do that? And that's ultimately a policy decision for you guys. The second is, what legal problems do we run into that? And we do run into a problem under the state law in that you would be taking away a use that they already have. Okay? So, what we're proposing are 3 changes.
Back up.
Yes, sir.
That didn't make sense to me.
Richard, you want to go on that one?
Yeah.
Help out with that explanation? Will you go on that one? Help out with that explanation?
Sounds like if you took away accessory use, then you got a problem. That is right.
See, if you take away a limitation, how is that down zoning?
That was something to do with
So your question is, what's the problem with just removing accessory use?
Yes.
Well, accessory use is a limitation on residential property. So, yes, removing it would remove a limit.
No. The question is, can you eliminate accessory use as a permitted use?
Well, accessory use is accessory and therefore incidental and subordinate to the permitted use. The permitted use is residential use.
I guess I'm not making myself clear. Here's the question that I asked. Okay. What happens if you eliminate VRDs as a use, permitted or otherwise, in the orange areas?
Maybe I can help. I think what you're saying is eliminating the accessory use means no VRDs.
No VRDs.
Zero nights. What they're talking about, I think, is no limitation on accessory use. It'll be outright everywhere.
Okay. Is that your question?
Yes.
Yeah.
That was confusion.
That was my question too.
Okay. If you allow if you eliminate accessory use and allow it 365 days a year, then the whole concept of having some areas where it's permitted and some areas where it's not goes out the window. Okay? That means everywhere in the city you can have 365 nights, okay, without limitation, anywhere in the city, and the only thing that would be governing that would be the market. If you want to do that, that's fine. If you don't want to do
And the
that,
covenants and conditions of that, of development or whatever.
Well, is that true?
Yeah, I mean, we,
Yeah, they're more
in our HOA, we have a prohibition against renting and/or using as a BRD. In other words, it has to be ownership. And that holds up.
A lot of areas don't have CCNRs.
Well, no, what I'm saying is, though, that
It doesn't change it for you because you got
no,
CCNRs.
it doesn't change it for me. It wouldn't change it for Cascade Head if that's what our CCNRs in that planned unit development are already. That's what I'm saying, is that, yes, it wouldn't protect, the other areas. But if the areas that are already protected by that, whether it's CCNRs and are still protected, unless they want to force them.
CCNRs can be more restrictive than the
Right.
city's ordinances, but they can't be less restrictive. There are lots of areas in the city that don't have CCNRs.
Right.
And they're only governed by what the zoning ordinance permits and does not permit. So again, if you want to eliminate accessory use and allow 365 days renting per BRD anywhere in the city, then the whole concept that I've been working on tonight is out the window.
So has there been any other cities that have no limitations?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Virtually every one of those that we look at.
Okay, Newport, is there any statistics of numbers of complaints because it's that way? Is there any information we can get?
You can get all of it.
I don't have that information.
They have negative repercussions if you have complaints against you. The city will, there's like a 3-stage process. The first one is a written warning, the second one is the 30-day, and the second one is the enforcement.
And
I guess I'm asking too about neighborhoods. Has there been any negative issues in neighborhoods maybe that were protected before, and now are not?
In the other cities?
In the other cities?
Some of them have use restrictions, like Karen Beach. You can rent one rental period.
I saw that about 14 days.
So there's a gap, that gives people who live nearby or permanent residents some relief or a break.
They also have, two types of permits in Cannon Beach there. That one, that's the vacation one, I think. The other one's the transient permit, and that's different than the 14 days.
Back in the 80s, Cannon Beach chopped off all VRDs, all rentals. And since that time, it's begun to change. But
Well, one of the things was they got taken to court.
Pardon?
They got taken to court.
Was that what happened?
Yeah. Seaside tried the same thing. They got taken to court. Said, no, you can't do it that way.
Okay.
Seaside has another, they're like one VRD and then 100 feet from that one, then
Right.
another 100 feet. So there's,
Density.
if accessory use goes away, then there's a lot of other ways to look at how you can keep things kind of,
One of the things
besides the days of the.
Well, it seems to me that you've got, if you have an accessory use right now clause in residential areas, 30 days, which to me, days is a meaningless measure when you've got these beautiful big 6-bedroom homes and you have the mom and pop 2-bedroom home, and you're applying the same metric to both of those units. They don't have the same benefit to the city or the same costs to the neighborhoods.
Well, I was just thinking more
Well,
simple.
what I'm getting at is what's the meaning of accessory use there? If you just took it away, would suddenly 500,000 more adults come to Lincoln City and triple or double our capacity? Would it increase the consumer at all?
Let me come back to a zoning discussion.
One thing I want to just piggyback on, Ron, and I appreciate your patience with us here, because I've heard of cats to take care of, is when we say the market determining, that's on the consumer side. There's also the side of provider, okay? I do not want to rent for 365 days a year. It would kill me. Not everyone is set up to do it, nor wants to do it. So I just don't want this misnomer that this happens, we're all going to be going crazy out there. It's just not going to happen.
But think back 15 years ago, okay? Again, and I'm going to go back to the idea of a comprehensive plan, okay, in our zoning ordinance. Markets change. Markets are unpredictable, okay? What works today may not work tomorrow, okay? the reason why you have zoning ordinances, the reason why you have comprehensive plan maps, is so that you can direct the development of your community. The best example of that is that residential areas don't have smokestacks. And why? Because cities say we don't want smokestacks next to residential areas. Okay? Or you don't have gas stations, or you don't have other types of businesses located in residential zones. Residential or ordinances, or zoning ordinances, are prescriptive in nature because they direct how you want to see your property or community develop. Now, if you go back 10 or 15 years ago and look at where we were with the resident or with the VRDs, I'm not sure you could have adequately predicted we would be where we are today. Okay? It's hard to forecast what's going to happen. That's why what we're proposing is a very traditional zoning approach. There are areas where you think it's okay. There are areas where you don't think it's okay.
I'm sorry, but I'm still stuck on the idea if the accessory use is gone, then we don't have the discussion so much of the zoning. We have more of a discussion of, okay, then what? You know, different cities do it different ways. Some, Manzanita, 17.5% of a certain areas that they allow them.
Yeah, you start talking about density, things like that.
Exactly.
And that makes sense.
The other part of the discussion, if you want to go that route, that's fine, but you'll have to look at it on these discussions as well. And that is, what is it like in your city right now? There may be areas where you can't say, we're going to govern it by density, because the density is already past what you want. So you also have to look at what is the makeup of your city right now, and what is the look of it. That's actually a little bit of what we're proposing. The R15 zone has 178 VRDs in it. Okay? It may be past the point of looking at any other alternative because there's just that many. Okay? So, I'm not saying anything's right or wrong. It's just these are things that you'll have to consider. Okay?
Well, it seems like, though, with all of this discussion about accessory use that we've gone through over the past few decades, me in the last 4 years, we haven't done a really great job of predicting how things are going to go, or coming up with ordinances, or even any kind of consensus about how to predict the way things are going to go. So if we apply this zone here and that zone there, we're just shooting in the dark.
What I recommend is, and I don't mean to cut you off, but I know we've got a lot to thought through. Just, I'm sorry. Don't do it again. I will not, sir. I just know we got to get through this.
Does this have to be all done tonight?
No, I'd like to plan.
Whatever you guys would like to do.
It's up to you.
Just getting all this information in front of me tonight, it's nice to go through it this way. And then we have time to go through a lot more material now that we have, and come back. And let's do a bullet point. Boom, 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 and get this going.
It would be good to let me get through these so that there's the explanation that goes with it.
That's what I'm saying. If we could do the explanation tonight, and then let's schedule another workshop where we can really discuss it.
I mean, Ron, you put a lot of time into this, and like we could give him time to go through it.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Okay, again, let me come back to the idea that what we're working on is the protection of the neighborhoods, as well as recognizing the market. Okay, if there are areas where you think that VRD should be limited in some way, one of the ways you can do that is by really restricting the accessory use definition. And what's before you tonight is the language that you would see changed is that we would strike out a VRD is allowed as an accessory use in a residential zone and permitted use in a commercial zone. And in its place, we would add, except as otherwise provided for in this title, a VRD is allowed an accessory use in the R175, R110, RM, and RR zones, and a permitted use, we can see what zones there are, provided the VRD meets the applicable standards of this chapter and obtains an annual license under Chapter 5.14. And we also have this provision. Incidental and subordinate accessory use is not commercial use. Commercial VRD operation is use of a dwelling for VRD purposes for more than, you guys fill in the number, VRD rental nights in a calendar year. Commercial use does not include use authorized by conditional use, non-conforming use, vested right land use approvals, and that should be a period there. I left something that we should have deleted. So
eliminate or through safe harbor?
Yes, and now I'll go on to explain that in just a few minutes.
Okay, so period after approvals.
After approvals, yeah. I think that's the way it is, shows up in the ordinance changes that you have before you. I just didn't change that on the slide. So that would limit. Now, I left the number of nights blank. I was going to put in a number, but I decided I better leave that blank. I don't know that I want to venture in that. Numbers that I have heard floating around go from somewhere to 15 days to 30 days. But I decided not to do that. I did not want to be that told. Okay. All right. Now, as I mentioned, we have properties that are located within those zones that have VRDs now. And so we've added a prior existing use exception that states, subject to the limitations and provisions of this section, a vacation rental dwelling located in the residential zones, R175, 10, RM, RR, and or the NCR zone. That's prior to, that would be the adoption date, obtain a vacation rental dwelling land use approval and a vacation rental dwelling land license, and such approvals remain valid, may operate without accessory use limitation. This authorization terminates upon sale or transfer of the property as defined in Chapter 17. Okay?
And then reverts to?
And then it goes back to the requirement that it has to meet the accessory use definition.
I can see that causing a Measure 49 claim to surface because you're devaluing that thing upon the sale of the property.
We don't, VRD licenses are not transferable now.
No, that's not the point. The point is that somebody owns a house in there now and they're using it full time. We grandfather that in, but we say, but if you sell the house, you can't sell it as a VRD.
It's just the opposite. I have a VRD right now.
Right.
And I can rent it, more than 30 days, 15 days, whatever number you guys pick, okay? When I sell that house, whoever buys it has to comply with the accessory use provisions. In other words, the license does not run with the property. It's owned by somebody, and once they transfer their interest in that property, then that license goes away.
But if they're renting it for 180 days a year, for instance, and then the accessory, this new wording reduces it because we've hung another number on there. Now you're going to generate a 49 claim.
It doesn't reduce it for the person that's operating under that license.
But it does, because that person has a value based on the fact it's a VRD, but now when they want to sell it, it won't be a VRD anymore.
You don't have that right now. Nobody has that right now.
I think you do.
But they could apply.
You can apply for a license.
You can apply for a license.
Yeah,
but if I was to sell to Councilman Arikis my property, he doesn't get my license now.
I understand that. But what I'm saying is that I'm renting my house right now, let's say, as a VRD, and I'm making X number of dollars. So I'm actually renting it for a lot more than what this new zone is going to allow, or the new wording is going to allow. So before that, I had X number of value because it was a VRD versus a house that was not being rented. And now, it goes back to a house that's not rented, or it's limited to the small number that you're talking about. That creates a down value.
Are you talking about in the sale of the property or in the use of the property?
I'm talking about the value of the property upon sale.
Yeah, because if you're downgrading it, because I can't sell my house because
That's right.
I'll no longer be able to rent it for 360 days or 180 days.
That's right.
So I'm losing a sale of my house because they're only going to be able to rent it for 15 days for VRD.
That's right.
But you don't have that right now. Let me give you an example. If I'm renting my house for 180 days and I sell it to you and you apply, the new number that has been applied for new VRDs over the last 6 months has been 90 days.
Right, and we've seen the loss in value of homes already because of that. So Roger's point is true, that you're going to see a loss of value. Even though, yes, I get the point, it is the way it is, but it wasn't the way it was. So.
It wasn't supposed to be that way, but that's what it's
Exactly.
become.
But that's because we didn't enforce it for 10 years.
I get
That's not because of a little law, that's because we didn't enforce it for 10 years.
That's what I say, that's what it's become.
These are the same arguments we've been having for years and years. The same arguments about whether it's a down zone or, but should we pick 30 days or 15 days, and what does a day mean? It's a 6-bedroom house.
Can I make a suggestion? I'm loving the information I'm getting. I love this presentation. I love to finish and go through this and hear everything you have to say, and then give us time to absorb it all. And then let's come back and make some decisions at another workshop.
Okay. We ready to keep going?
Please.
Okay. I'm going to make one comment, though. Again, you're talking zoning. You don't have a right to do everything you want with your property. If I could, I'd put an industrial plant because it's the highest value right next to any of you guys. I don't have that right because it is zoning. I'm talking about very traditional zoning. Okay? All right. Let's go to the next one. These are areas that currently are not permitted where VRDs are not permitted. They're the professional campus, the Nell Scott Cottage, planned industrial park, open space, marine waterway, and the natural resource overlay. There's no changes in the ordinance that are needed for this. Okay, any questions on those? All right. Let's talk about Roads End. Roads End currently operates under an agreement with the city, which means it operates under the R1A county zone. Proposal before you tonight does not change that. The city would not initiate any kind of zoning changes, which any one of these changes to the zoning ordinance does do that. It would continue to operate as is until such time as the property is zoned to a city zone. The VRDs are subject, however, to the licensing provisions of the city's ordinances.
Our annexation agreement indicated that we would do no changes in zones for 5 years.
That's right.
So,
Unless initiated by.
unless they initiate,
That's right.
correct.
Which it has been initiated by city council.
The city would not initiate a zone change.
So anyway, so the proposal is really kind of not to do anything with Roads End until such time as the zoning comes before you guys, planning commissioners and city council,
Providing it's a zoning,
provided it's a zoning question.
not a licensing.
They are subject to the licensing requirements. Okay. The next thing we wanted to talk about was the maximum occupancy level. This goes to the heart of looking at how do you protect the neighborhoods, okay? And one of the big questions that comes are things like congestion and so forth with vehicles and all of that. It's being proposed that you change the maximum occupancy level. Right now, it's governed by the state's the state's building code, and for VRD since 2010, they have a maximum of 16 tenants that they can have. Under this one, in residential zones, the maximum overnight occupancy would be 2 persons per bedroom plus 1 additional person per property. For the purposes of maximum occupancy, those under 3 years of age shall not be counted. The license shall state clearly the numeric occupancy limit for the dwelling, including specifically the number of bedrooms.
Is this a new, is this existing one?
This is a change. This would be new.
And there are other communities like Cannon Beach and Seaside that use 3 years of age, the same measure.
Yes.
I'm going to say that still concerns me because as a young parent, my kids come with me until they can be on their own. And a 4-year-old can't be on their own. So do I have to make a decision whether to bring my kids if I'm coming with another family? You know, I just don't think that number's appropriate at the age.
I think it's good to have consistency among the various coastal communities on this, some more consistency.
I agree, they're wrong.
would be good.
Yeah, I don't think they need to become ours. That's easy.
Do we have an ordinance here?
For those that are, again, it's governed by the state's building code. For those that were licensed since 2010, it's a maximum of 16. Now, the effect of this is that when I look at the 300 units that are affected by the 16 number, currently you can get your occupancy for those is about 4,800 people. If this goes into place, it drops it in half to about 2,400, a little bit, 2,413, 2,415, something like that. And with that drops, hopefully, things like congestion, the other issues that come with having commercial use in a residential area. Perhaps, perhaps not. Don't know.
So we want to limit the number of drivers, so we should have 16 and under, or 15 and under, if that's our problem. Congestion being.
I'll let you guys work on the number. I threw a number in. I let you guys work on the number.
I'm not going to get into it. I guess we talked. The whole enforcement side of this is just preposterous. There's no way you're going to be able to go, well, my kid's over 4, or this kid's over 7. That's not your kid.
Well, you know, if you focus on kids, that's the truth.
Yeah,
But it's quite enforceable if you just want to monitor how many people are renting it.
I understand.
It's very, very enforceable.
It is, and I understand. I don't want to discourage families from coming to Lincoln City. I don't want to do that.
You know, after this is over, I'm going to take all this home. I'm going to scribble all over it, all my comments, thoughts.
We'll meet, we'll sir.
Please don't.
I will second.
Okay, parking. Now, one of the things I have before you tonight is just one item on parking, but there are several, okay, and most of them do not pertain to the zoning ordinance. One of the interesting questions we asked of the city council, do we have a citywide parking problem or do we have a VRD parking problem? We have a citywide parking problem, of which VRDs are one contributor. So we've talked about multiple things that we can do to create new parking areas. Some of these are very long term. One that was rather easy to do is that our current restrictions on VRDs is that we do not allow triple stacking. In other words, 3 cars. We do allow that for anybody who owns a home. Okay, so one of the proposals before you tonight is to strike out the prohibition of triple stacking. They do have to stay parked in their parking area. They can't. They have the restrictions on the number of vehicles that they can have based on the parking spaces they have still remains. They can't be out into the right of way, so forth. But if they have sufficient space so that they could do triple stacking, we would now allow it under this proposal. Okay, the next few items that I bring up are part of the licensing ordinances and not part of the zoning ordinances. I bring them up so you can see this whole thing as a package, not necessarily as just an individual item. The first is in transferability. There was a discussion about allowing some limited transferability upon the death of the owner. So before you is the addition of the language, if upon the death of the license holder, the ownership of the BRD transfers by operation of law to an executor or heir, one, other than by survivorship to a spouse or domestic partner, or two, other than to a trust which benefits any spouse or domestic partner, then the license shall continue in effect for a period of 1 year, or until the heir or executor transfers the BRD to any person who transfers.
I guess just, it ceases to be a VRD though, so the executor is not transferring a VRD, transferring a home, title to a home, right? There's that minor point.
Thank you. Any questions on that? Enforcement. Okay. I'll quickly go through these. Again, some of them require some changes. You'll see those in the sample ordinances I have before you. One of the things that we discussed is having a call center, which we have proposed to use as our dispatch. The idea behind that is that when a call comes in, if it's a non-emergency, in other words, it's not a life or safety issue, the dispatch would then email the local representative and email the city. The local representative would have a certain time period in which they have to respond to it. Right now, it just says in a timely manner, and then the staff would have a time period in which they verify that the problem has been corrected.
Would that change in each VRD? Would that change? Is that there's only one phone number they can call? So we can track issues and have statistics on complaints.
Exactly. There's a couple of problems we have with the current practice. One is that because they're calling, so if I have a problem, I'm calling the local representative. The city has no way of knowing whether the problems that are existing and if they were corrected or not. In addition to that, so we don't have that's one of the problems. We don't have a way to track it. The other problem that we have is that I may have 3 or 4 VRDs that are around me, and so that means I've got 3 or 4 phone numbers I would have to call, depending on which one it is. This would give one number. People would call it. The dispatcher would determine if it's a life safety issue. If it is, it gets the police handle it. If it's a nuisance issue, it goes to the local representative, and then a copy goes to our staff here so that they can follow up and make sure the problem gets resolved. Okay? Yes, sir.
Is the local representative defined as living within the boundaries of the city or the urban growth boundary?
It's within the urban growth boundaries, and I think our current language says they can be 10 miles beyond that. So again, response time right now is just simply defined as timely manner. We'd like to tighten that up a little bit, but I don't have a proposal as to what that number would be yet. The next area is noise. Right now, our quiet time starts at 7 p.m. There was discussion about loosening that up a little bit to 10 p.m. You'll see that in Chapter 5 of the language in front of you that has that in it. However, I think it needs a little bit more work because the decibel levels are very, very low. It's 50 decibels, which is a very low decibel. So we need to look at that a little bit. The next one that I wanted to bring up is really quite an important one, and that's the health safety regulations. It has been recommended to us as a staff, and we're bringing this before you tonight, that VRDs be required to meet some or all of the traveler's accommodation regulations that the state has. You have a copy of that before you. As I read through that and looked through it, I had some problems with trying to apply all of those, but there were some that seemed to be applicable to that. So I'm going to leave that for you guys to look at and come back and with further discussion on that. And then finally, penalties. Right now, violations are a Class A civil infraction. One of the things that they discussed, and I don't have the language before me tonight, was that penalties are based on or nuisance types of violations, so think of trash, okay, on whether or not the VRD local representative took care of it or not. So think trash got tipped over, report goes in, they took care of it versus they didn't take care of it. How do the penalties work? And so that's where the city council in their discussions have left that, but I have not finished preparing the language on that. Maybe as I got into it, there's a little bit more that I need to look at.
And Ron, within that, I know we've had discussions concerning who actually has responsibility for a violation. You know, if someone pulls up, parks, a car's hanging out over the sidewalk, who parked the car?
That's part of it.
Yeah, okay.
Parking is actually a big issue. Right now, it's the person who is fined is the VRD owner.
Right.
Okay. The question is, should it be the person who's parked illegally? Okay. If that's the case, then we need to make some changes in that.
I have a question on this noise issue. I live in a small neighborhood where there are no VRDs. So my neighbors are really loud. I call the police department. A police officer is probably dispatched. And that's not by the same number we're talking about with the call center. So what's the difference? If we've got a noise problem, it seems to me that if the police officer is going to respond to my house, they also ought to respond to the house where the noise is, the VRD.
I think that could be listed in part of the criteria of taking phone calls too. I mean, oh, this so-and-so is too loud over there. Well, then one of the questions could be asked, is this a VRD? Then it's logged. And that way the statistics can be monitored, and next time things come around, we'll have the numbers.
But the noise is breaking the law, so it really boils down to the
police will take care of it when it's
officer.
noted as a VRD.
Within that, you're assuming that those are vacationers. It could be anyone. It could be anyone living is a vacationer who's violating the rules. And it's not always the case.
That's why we're trying to get rid of the noise.
I hear you. I'm on your side.
Who cares whether they're vacationers or not?
Exactly right. Exactly right.
I just want to say that, so the penalties, instead of being kind of lumped the way they are now, they could be tiered, or there could be different levels, and different people getting tickets.
Again, one of the things that will be interesting is this, again, comes back to parking, which is an interesting problem. Because right now, the violation of parking for VRD is the violation of their regulations for their permit. Okay, so I can park outside in front of VRD without any problems. Okay, it's legal. I'm not going to get a ticket unless I'm in front of a fire hydrant or something like that. But if a VRD renter parks out in front of it, they also are not in violation of any parking laws. But the VRD owner is in violation for allowing that to happen. Okay? That's a
gotcha.
Yes. Yeah, and so that comes back to, if you're going to go after parking, who do you go after? And you go after the person that is parking illegally, and you've got to define what is illegal, or do you go after the VRD, which ultimately means you're going after their license? Okay.
Which I think maybe it was Kip that addressed it, and you can't have time limitations. You can't no parking overnight, or 1 hour, or no parking at all, and I think that's easy enough to address in those areas.
Only if you have enforcement.
Well,
Yeah, we don't have that kind of enforcement because they're too busy doing other things rather than checking parking spaces.
Interestingly enough, as I look at all that we've talked about, the most difficult and the longest term and the most expensive is going to be parking.
Yeah.
Much more than accessory use or anything like that. Because you're ultimately looking at trying to create new parking areas, you're trying to redo what's legal to park on a road and what's not legal to park on a road and things like that. So I think, personally, I think parking is going to be one of our biggest challenges. All right. What's next? Okay, so on Monday, on the agenda, if you guys are so inclined, we have before the City Council for them to make a motion to approve that we initiate the ordinance preparation and public input process. Okay? That kicks in the whole public process, that kicks in the creation of the record, that kicks in the studies, the second things, which includes studies on the effects of these proposals on housing, the economic impact of these proposals, the effects of these proposals on transportation, how these proposals meet the state goals, and as we talked about earlier, how the proposals comply with the city's comprehensive plan. So those are all studies that still need to be finished before we are through. Again, if the city council says go, then I have asked them if we can hold some additional public meetings in the time while things are getting prepared so that we can take this on the road and discuss it with people, and then ultimately public hearings will be held before the planning commission and city council for an ordinance that will eventually be adopted or not adopted.
Well, Ron, it was suggested earlier that we digest this new information and then come back with another workshop, and then at that point, I would feel more comfortable in recommending something, but without having an opportunity to really go through this, I think that's premature for us to do that Monday night.
That's fine if you'd like to do that.
Yeah, I feel road weary, I want to get this done, but I don't think this is road ready. I agree. And racing to the finish line with a product.
Well, there have been a number of suggestions tonight, and these don't speak to that, so that's why I think we need more time.
Well, but I guess if we said yes, for everyone's benefit, all we would be saying is let's begin the process. And then within that process, we could digest and construct what we really want, correct? So it's not entirely necessary unless you want to meet as the two bodies together again. But it's not entirely necessary.
That's valuable, I think.
I'm not saying it's not. I'm just saying we're still going to have that discussion no matter what.
Initiating the process.
Well, this discussion has had, probably half of it has been about accessory use. I think that's the elephant in the room. That's the elephant in the room. I have no idea what kind of a consensus there is in this room about whether or not to even have accessory use. Keep it, toss it all together. That's the answer to that question, or the consensus around that question, majorly impacts this stuff. I wouldn't want to dive into this stuff until I shackled that elephant.
Well, that's what I'm suggesting. That question is a part of this stuff, but we need to answer that. And that's why I'm thinking after digesting all this, we can get that answered, I believe, in another workshop.
I'm not sure that digesting this is a prerequisite for deciding whether or not accessory use is a good idea.
It will help clarify some things in my head.
Go ahead. But I would like to hear an answer to that question. Is there a consensus, or are we completely fractured around that?
I don't think we can reach a consensus.
You don't think so?
No, I mean legally, it's a workshop.
Well, we can't change the decision.
No, we can't
share
vote
our
on it.
It's really not a lot of difference between a consensus and a decision.
I think a suggestion would be that to really talk about what it would mean to eliminate accessory use and what that would look like. If that went away, then what else goes in its place? And I think that's
the work session.
That's
should
the
have.
work session. That's where, I think, because until at least some of us have that answer, I don't think we feel comfortable with moving with this because we don't have any way to weigh it.
We don't see the picture of that yet.
Does it have?
For me, I'm comfortable moving forward.
No one
Whatever
said
that's
anything about long-term rentals for those that don't own homes versus the monetary benefit of those that operate BRDs.
Yeah,
So you're looking at a large percentage of the population that are living in apartments that don't even have the opportunity to rent homes at all due to the fact that it's better to have VRD. So you take that away, well, I'm going to want to make as much money as I can as a VRD versus having a long-term rental. That'll benefit the people of Lincoln City that live here in apartments. That hasn't been at all talked about.
I don't care. I can just skip talking. But for a long time, I was of the idea that vacation rental dwellings tap into long-term rentals, which we need more of. And I went back and I was thinking about it, and went back to 1977 when I got into town, wife and child, and we were desperately looking. I didn't have 2 quarters to rent together, and we were really looking for a place to rent. And the rented situation back then was so tight that people would come and wait in the morning at the news guard office to get the first lead on what might be for rent, and they would all race to try to rent that if there was something at all. So I started thinking about that's not a new problem, but why did it happen that way? Why wouldn't they rent long term? And I think that the answer to that was that the owner wanted to use their property sometime during the year. That's why they bought it. And so they didn't want to rent long term because it would take that away. And back then they did illegal VRDs. So I'm just not real certain, on how many long-term rentals would be there in absence of a VRD, whether the owner might just be there himself. Anyway, just a thought, another way of looking at it. I don't know that that's accurate, but I mean,
Well, to piggyback on what you're just saying, when I came in '85, we could rent a 3-bedroom house for 9 months. Because 3 months of the year, the owner wanted to be there, or do whatever. But, so, I mean, it would have required moving, and I found lots of homes I could rent for 9 months out of the year, but not for a full year. So that was, that was an issue, but it had nothing to do, most of them had nothing to do with VRDs. It had to do with, the owner wanted to be there for 3 months.
Right. And I definitely, I sympathize and empathize. I know Councilor Anderson and I, talk a lot about housing and the like, but you're not going to see an oceanfront home turn into a 30-day rental. It's just not going to happen. And then the market side of it being, there's a market for a 30-day, but is there a provider for a 30-day? You could not pay me enough money to become a landlord again. It is almost pointless to become a landlord.
Well,
because of all the laws.
There is a migration path. I'm looking at John over there, builds fabulous houses. One of these days, that 6-bedroom house up there on 66th Street isn't going to be a VRD, but it's going to house a family of 12 people. This is just hypothetical. There's a real case. There's a house, a 5-bedroom, 4 or 5-bedroom house, 4 or 5 houses north of me that's been a VRD and was kind of a nuisance for quite a while. They turned it into a full-time rental, and there's 9 people living there. I think that's a good thing. So, frankly, I think that the new VRDs that are coming into our city is elevating the quality of our housing stock. The ma and pa's, the 2 bedrooms that have been there since 1947, that's a whole different ballpark. And I don't think we're talking about apples and oranges when we try to apply the same ordinances to those guys. I'm rambling like the mayor does.
How did I get in it?
There is one consensus item that I'm looking for. I'm really looking to the city council on this one because it's their agenda. Do you want this on Monday's agenda, or do you want to come back for another work meeting? And if you do want to come back for another work meeting, give me a little bit of direction on what else you want to look at.
I'm happy moving forward.
I'm not ready for it.
What does that mean?
That means number 1 up there.
That means initiate the ordinance preparation and public input process.
Gotcha.
No, I don't think we have anything to take public yet.
time.
I think the concern about the accessory use thing is paramount. I think we need to see what it looks like if we remove accessory use. I think that's premature to go there.
Now, this is my other question then. I'm hearing a little bit of support for having this on Monday, and I'm hearing a lot of support. And right now it's kind of split. What's your process?
Dick?
It's nice to be in control. Thank you, Vic.
Well, the question on the table was, does the city council want to move forward with that? Is it a majority?
That's actually not the question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
The question is, do you want it on Monday's agenda?
Right, that's what I meant.
And then you'll vote. That's how you'll come up with a consensus. My question before you today is, do you want it on Monday's agenda or not?
And
Question.
Go ahead.
If it's on Monday's agenda, does it eliminate any more workshops?
No.
I like discussion. So by having it on the agenda, it would force council to talk about it. Exactly, motion and discussion. This is Tuesday. You will have read the material that was handed out, think about it, but at least council will have to answer some of the questions, I think, Nathan, that you brought up, at least based on here, and then be able to talk about it. So, I'm comfortable with leaving it on the agenda because I know there'll be another round of discussions there. And we may decide not to move forward because of emotions.
Well, you know, Dick, unfortunately, I'm going to be in Mexico for my meeting.
Oh.
And I would like to be involved in any discussion.
That's new information to the
Yeah, it is. I just didn't want to do it this way. I wanted my logic and wit.
Let's move the meeting to Mexico.
We can go ahead and put it on the meeting.
Christmas party, planning commission is not.
I would be more comfortable with the first meeting.
Okay, now, the other question I have is that I know there's a lot more that you're interested in knowing. So, one of the takeaways that I got from this, the biggest one is, what happens if accessory use is simply eliminated in the city? And then what are some other alternatives to control the impact on the neighborhoods?
That's correct.
Okay? Am I getting the idea that's what you wanted the staff to work on? Okay. Let me make one final thing on this. Again, it's a process. And even if the city council says, go, start the formal process, what we have before you tonight, I am quite certain, is not what the end process or the end document will be. It may be close, it may not be close at all. There's a lot of work, massaging, and the most important work on that is what you're going to hear from your constituents. Okay? So as we go into that process, one of the things that we'll be doing is setting up an email address so that if anybody wants to send information, they can send it to one email. We'll then be able to disperse it out and get it to you. It's essentially beginning to the creation of the record. So we know as a staff that what we've got tonight takes us a big step forward, but it certainly is not the end step. Okay?
Ron, I guess, and I don't know how to do it, so let me just voice this, but this body previously, councils have discussed this topic for on and on and on. And looking back on it, what I found was that one, it was hard to keep the council current, and also harder to keep the public current as we weighed options. And that's one of the things Mr. Mayor, I'm worried about, and I think that's probably where Kip was going. If you start too early with the process, the public doesn't seem to catch up. If I can, the yes/no maps was going to be everything. Well, yes/no's got out a long time, and we had a lot of early, and we had a lot of discussion of other options. But the reference to the yes/no kept coming up at clouding issues. So one of the things we've really got to pay attention to as new ideas enter in is, dropping or reminding people that that no longer is valid as we move along. And I think that was part of the confusion, and continues to be a confusion of where are you where are we in the process of our discussion, and what have we eliminated and not revisited. If that makes sense.
Well, I think, and I'm not married to the idea. I'm fine delaying. But I will say this, and I've said it before, and as a former regular BRD owner, and I'm now in a VR zone, I don't have quite the worry that I've had. But the anxiety of this, as what has been driving so much of this division and derision and confusion, it's just, it kind of piggybacks on what you're saying, that things get lost. And the anxiety is so high that for me personally, every time there was a council meeting and it was on the agenda, my guts were on fire, because I didn't know what was going to happen. And maybe not understanding the process as well as I do now, I didn't need to be quite as anxious. But that's what's out there. And you heard it at the last council meeting. The people coming forward, some of them in tears. And that's all I'm saying is we need to be sensitive to the fact that there are real people being impacted by our time, our delays, if that's not even the right word. I just want everyone to be sensitive to that fact that there are a lot of people waiting for us to make a sort of a decision, and then so they can plan their lives accordingly.
But and I agree. And that's what we talked about, or at least I tried to wrap up with the comment, the uncertainty. Absolutely understand it. But as we around this table, both commission and council, understand there is a process, unfortunately. And that's part of, again, the public and often ourselves get caught up with not understanding it, forgetting where we are, and bring that anxiousness onto ourselves. And so, I'm with you. We've got to keep everybody as informed as we can. Even maybe in summary topic on every discussion where we are, where we've been, and
well, I commend Ron on his ability to keep this as neat and narrow as possible as he has. So, and I think as long as we continue forward with this type of presentation to the public, it will lessen that.
Because it is uncertain for everyone. It's uncertain for the BRD owners. It's uncertain for second homeowners. It's uncertain for permanent residents.
Absolutely.
So, when would we go in and talk about parking and landscaping? Because we have them listed there, but we don't have any. They haven't been expanded on. So, if not this session here, when do we talk about those?
Let me answer that with a question again for the city council. It would be a little bit of a breaking of protocol, but I think you can do this. The ordinances that pertain to things like parking and some of these others do not require a recommendation from the planning commission because they're not part of the land use ordinances. However, if you would like them a part of that, we can add those into. I know we're going to hold another work meeting to talk about the accessory use. We can add those into that if you would like to. It's up to you.
We haven't planned or scheduled a work session, but it sounds like that ought to be one of the next things to do.
It will be, and we'll get our staff working on that to come up with.
If we're going to have a work session anyway, then I'm in favor of having the planning.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. That sounds fine.
Ron, just one thing. I had a citizen call me, and I went and met with the citizen who was concerned about the ordinance and so on. But she had a suggestion, which I thought was kind of interesting. She says that for any future VRD that's going to be built as a VRD, that it be held to commercial standards, just like a hotel. And when I thought about it, that kind of made sense. I just thought maybe the staff might want to consider looking at that when they're making their next.
I think there's already laws on the books on that.
What's
I'm
that?
not sure.
I don't think so.
Not sprinkler systems and such.
No, elevator sprinkler systems and so
Number
on.
of bedrooms. Work into that ordinance. 6 bedrooms requires commercial standards. Is that right?
I think the bedrooms might be, but the other parts of it.
I think what you're getting at, I'm just now connecting here. I think maybe what you're getting at is because if it is built as, a VRD built as a business, then it should be
Built to hotel standard.
Well, one of the things to look at as you're reviewing the materials is the Oregon Travelers Accommodation Regulations. Look to that. That will give you an idea because that is what's required of hotels.
Just another little suggestion, maybe these workshops should be closer together instead of waiting 2 weeks for another time, so we can get this going. I mean, let's get this done, but let's do it right.
We'll get our staff to pick a couple days, call everybody, find out the best time, and get it done accordingly.
Do it, does the work session have to have a 2-week public notice?
Is it wrong to set a date tonight so we know when to?
If you guys are ready and want to set a date, I'm fine with that. If you feel like you're ready to do that.
What's going on? I'm only going to be there. Saturday to Saturday.
We're talking just Mondays and Tuesdays. Thursday, Wednesday nights are off for me.
How about the second? I need a little bit of time to work on these things.
What else were we? I was going to miss something. That week I was out of town.
The first, the city council has a work meeting from 3 to 5 on the first.
We can do it the second.
2 weeks from tonight?
I'm going to be out of town the whole week.
I will not be available either on the second.
Is that a planning commission?
No, it's the week
Yeah,
before.
the third Tuesday.
Yeah.
Which one?
The second is the first Tuesday.
The second is the first. It's not the third Tuesday.
If you're looking to Tuesdays, then you're going to be looking at, well,
How about the ninth?
that's 3 weeks away.
That's after our meetings, the first council meeting in February.
It is.
Isn't the second
The 9th, Ron? You were proposing the 9th?
No, that's just a date I've heard. So can we 9th?
Does it have to be
That's the latest one I've heard. No.
right on a Thursday or
How many
Wednesday?
are-
Sounds bad to me.
How many are here on the second? I heard that West was.
That's a 1 a.m. meeting.
So far, I've heard the 2nd and the 9th were Tuesday, and then the question about a Thursday.
I think you're first.
Tonight, that's a trivia night.
Because we put Monday meeting.
What night is that, Richard?
Trivia night, so.
You want me to go ahead and go back to our original idea of getting staff and 2 or 3 days and then call you guys?
Yeah, let's do it.
And the chances of getting everybody to agree is, around this table, it's twice as hard as the next discussion.
So the consensus is we'll call it. Okay. And we'll do that. We'll do that quickly. We'll get our staff together quickly in 2-3 days.
Thank you, Steph.
It was a planning commission meeting already. Depends on what they have on there.
Well, that'd be the second, but FinCon will all leave.
We can't have other business to do that second. That's why I don't know.
Yeah.
Was that your,
I just wanted to raise the question of another elephant in the room. Why do we care about limiting to one ownership?
The idea behind that, there were 2 ideas behind that. One was accessory use. If you had two places, then how can they put the accessory use?
Right.
And the other one is that a person theoretically or corporation could buy up a bunch of lots and then build a big hotel right in the middle of the neighborhood.
So we know that can't happen. And if accessory use went away, that wouldn't be an issue. Why would we care about limiting the number of owners?
Well, I didn't say I did here.
Why would we? I think it's something to think about.
It's in the proposal to eliminate, isn't it?
Two of the zones have limited ownership.
And aren't those residential zones? I mean, where they're trying to perfect.
Without time and ownership limitation. Except in
Two of the zones still have the constraint that you can only own one of
on
them.
the east side of the highway.
Correct. And my understanding, to answer the question, is.
Excuse me, I'm going to interrupt, and I know this is yours, but guys in the audience, I cannot hear a thing up here. I can ask you that. Oh, thank you. That's okay.
Go ahead.
My understanding is that's the orange one, and that's, was to preserve some neighborhood areas with the VRD permitted with time and ownership limitation. So 30 days, or 14 days, or whatever the number was, and then only one. Again, it's in essence saying it's not a business, it's not a commercial.
Right.
So,
What's my point?
yeah, I mean, doesn't that answer your question?
No, it doesn't. My point was, if this forum or if the city council decided to eliminate accessory use, then I was just proposing that you might also throw into that the consideration of eliminating the limited ownership. Because the accessory use going away kind of eliminates the need for the ownership limitation.
And that's exactly what this proposal does up here in the dark green. It threw out accessory use, which, permit no time limitation. I see.
If we take out accessory, this whole package is nothing.
Ownership limitation, ownership limitation, all three of them have ownership limitation. I was just going to say, if accessory use went away, why wouldn't
We wouldn't allow that package.
ownership limitation? Just think about it. Would anybody else like to speak?
Well, I do have a question. Not about this, though. It's about the VRD appeals board.
Oh, yeah. Yes, please, bring that up.
There was a question, did council pass that to us just for the one, or is that permanent?
Permanent.
It's yours.
I wasn't there, so I didn't hear it, but the anecdote was that the city council had an ex parte problem with one of the VRD complaints, and because of the ex parte, the entire council was ex parte'd, and that complaint came to us because of that. I don't remember.
I remember
it was a permanent deal.
I remember it's coming to us as permanent. Okay.
So that
I just want to clear it up.
So who asked the question?
Right. Anytime we can get out of work. The VRDs are still on.
That came up.
Who brought it up? Who passed you guys? I feel idiot.
Councilors, commissioners.
I just want to thank everyone who showed up. Well done, and thank you for allowing us to do our job.
Anything else, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen? We're adjourned.